So we have scores of conversations every week with landlords, property investors, about the Renters' Rights Bill. And some of the things that I hear are just absolutely unbelievable. So I heard a great one last week from a landlord that was really concerned that because he lived more than 20 miles from his property, he wasn't going to be able to manage it again when the Renters' Rights Bill came in. And it's become the stuff of folklore. Obviously, that's a nonsense. It's become the stuff of folklore. And when I put the phone down, I say to Ben, this can't happen in a pip room. So Bristol are absolutely sick to the back teeth of hearing from us, talking about the Renters' Rights Bill. But it's really important that as a community, we're kept safe.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a very quick overview of some of the bits that we're going to talk to you guys about today. We're going to start off telling a little bit about us, what are our credentials to be here to comment on this and to talk through the Renters' Rights Bill with you. What is the story so far? You know, what do we know is coming and what amendments and things have been put in place and how do we get where we are? And then what proposed amendments did we have from the peers, because it's gone to the House of Lords through a very lengthy committee stage, and there are some proposed amendments that are being sent back to the Commons. And then, of course, what happens next. Being informed, getting this stuff from source is extremely important, and that's what we want to talk to you guys about today. So a little bit about us. The KPA Group is a group of companies started by my grandma back in 1948. We've got businesses in disparate sectors, within property, within marketing, and some other sectors as well. And we're landlords and investors first and foremost. We have a diverse portfolio, as I mentioned in the introduction, throughout the South West and South Wales, all residential, HMOs, single lets, blocks of flats, family rentals, supported living. And we are very proud partners and hosts of the Bristol event. I think events like this are absolutely critical. I think Richie hit the nail on the head earlier when he said 2% of people are here and are driven. Welcome to the 2%. The people in this room want to educate themselves, want to know how to do it properly, and that's what you're here for, to be surrounded by those who are also looking to do the same. Because it normalizes what is actually not a normal thing that a lot of people are doing, and it puts you in the place to discuss and have those proper conversations and hear some of the horror stories, so that doesn't happen on your site if you're going to be doing development and working with some other people in the room. We started our own letting agency because, to be quite frank, we've got a very dim view of the letting agency market. I know there are some in the room that will do it very differently, but none of you guys are based in Bristol, so we needed to go and start our own to do it properly. And as I mentioned earlier, there are no qualifications as such for being a letting agent. There are accreditation bodies that you can sign up to, but anybody can do it. There's a very low barrier to entry. And learning all of this stuff while we were self-managing our own portfolio, I was horrified, well, we both were horrified, at what we heard sat across the table from us, telling us with all the confidence in the world, the absolutely wrong legislation and compliance. So it's really important, because as a landlord, your name is ultimately above the door, and you cannot delegate that responsibility, nor should you. So making sure that you're aware of that compliance is extremely important. The letting agency is 4 locations. I noticed Angie snuck so far onto there, so I'm not quite sure where else you are. I have an idea of where else she's got her eye on, but 4 locations at the moment, mainly in the southwest. Bristol, Weston, Bridgewater and Southampton are coming a little bit closer to this way, but we're very proud to be multi-award winning. But the key part there is built by landlords for landlords. As I mentioned earlier with Gerard, working with someone who understands your perspective as your service provider in anything you do within property, I think is extremely important, because they will understand both sides of that coin. And yeah, transparency and giving back to Bristol is something we're very passionate about. So this is our team at last Christmas at an event working with children who are on free school meals, getting them into events and things, and kind of giving them some great experiences and some fantastic parts of the city, and doing a little bit to try and give back to what is a fantastic city that we're both very passionate about. So on to the Renters' Rights Bill and a bit of compliance. I'm going to hand over to Angie, who's going to talk a bit more about this one.
You're happy to click the button, lovely.
I will indeed.
So this has been around a while. It's been in the post, as they say. We've had our eyes on it from July 2019, when the government announced that it was going to be making some changes. New deal for renters, an end to no-fault evictions, and a complete overhaul of the system. So 2019, which, 6 years ago, coming up 6 years ago now, we knew that change was afoot and that things were coming in. Now, the big thing that people saw was, oh my God, are we going to lose Section 21, no fault evictions? And as an agent, that's a massive red herring, because no landlord that has a good tenant that pays their rent and looks after their property wants to get rid of them. So usually they're used for expediency, and we've not been using them for a very long time now because we know that this has been coming. So, but that's the flagship, that's all that anyone has seen. But there's actually an awful lot more detail in what's to come than losing Section 21, the so-called no-fault evictions. June 2022, under the Tories, the white paper, a fairer private rented sector came in, and then that was what then became the Tories' version of the Renters' Rights Bill, the Renters' Reform Bill. But that was the white paper that they put out, and we looked at that, and there was so much in there that everyone went, oh my goodness me, what's coming? But we've had a while. We've known that this is coming. Again, this became the Renters' Reform Bill under the previous government. Lots and lots of similarities. Lots of similarities. Things that people are talking about now. We're saying, well, hang on a minute, that was in the Renters' Reform Bill. But also lots of changes that have come in under Labour. And I think the key, and it's funny actually because I heard Gerard was the first person that I heard mention it during one of his talks, and I thought, I've been thinking this for a long time, and it's interesting that he mentioned it, was that it's now called the Renters' Rights Bill, and the key is in the phrase. But yeah, this was under the previous government. Sadly, it didn't make the wash-up, but it's now become Labour's hot potato. And it's a key manifesto pledge. And that's important to note because there's going to be some back and forth, and there has been a lot of back and forth between the two houses, House of Lords and the House of Commons. But it's really important to understand what the political landscape is and to see that it's a big flagship for the Labour Party manifesto. And it's now the Renters' Rights Bill with the inclusion of a few new clauses. It's the abolition, so the key ones really for us that we get asked about a lot is the abolition of advanced rent payments. Now that's going to be a real problem if this comes in. It's going to be a real problem particularly for student landlords. It's going to be a real problem for people who have no other way of proving affordability. So if you've got people that are retired, for instance, they've got savings, and they want to, say, pay 6 months up front, that's going to be a real problem for them. It's going to be a problem for overseas tenants, and it's going to be a real issue. They are talking about being extremely strict about that as well. They're talking about being 1 month's payment of rent, and even if the pro rata rents, if they move in partway through a month, means that you go over the 1 month, you've got to take 2 payments for it. So and that's going to be confusing, it's going to be extra admin, but they are being at the moment really, really strict about that. The other one is AWAB's law, which was the young lad in Rochdale, which I find really interesting because that actually wasn't in the private rental sector, but they're talking about bringing stuff in for that with regard to mould. The issue here, and it's really interesting to note that a lot of people say, well, if you're a decent landlord, you should be doing this anyway. They're missing the point big time. It's the time restrictions that they're looking to bring in that's going to be the problem. So if you're self-managing or you're going through an agent, conversations need to be had about processes. Can they get someone in 14 days? So the guy that we use in Bristol is absolutely fantastic. And he said the problem is that I would struggle even now to get there and put a plan in place within these timescales. So it's not the case of no one you'd like to think, and certainly no landlords that we work with would want any of their tenants to be unsafe and it to be an issue, but it's the sheer mandating of timescales that's going to be a big problem. And the 12-month freeze on properties removed for sale, I'm sure we can all understand in this room that that could be a big problem, because that means that, it goes to the estate agents. Often estate agents inflate the price, it stays on the market for a while, it won't sell, but you have got a 12-month freeze and lockout on this being able to go to the rental market once you've withdrawn it for sale. And HMO landlords and student landlords, without doubt, are going to be the most affected when this bill comes in. And I say when this bill comes in because we're looking at timescales of about September time, September, October time. I think there's no doubt that it's going to come in.
Yeah. Guys, just very quickly, can I ask for a show of hands, who currently takes money up front more than a month when they start tenancies? Yeah, absolutely. So they're actually talking about backdating that, and if you've taken money, having to pay it back when the bill comes in. And a lot of student landlords will do this when they're renting to international students, because that's the security, and from the student's perspective, that makes life so much easier. They've paid up front. Or even, I'll pay quarterly when my student finance comes in, and that's going to stop as well. So it's being on the front foot of a lot of these things and thinking, okay, how are we going to tweak and how are we going to change those processes that we run through? And AOAB's law, exactly as Angie said, those timeframes are going to be tight. And they're going to be tight for investigating any hazard within a property. There is 28 different categories of hazards under the HHSRS in a property. There's a lot of things there to be aware of. And if you do get things that are reported, so a lot of people say, but hang on a minute, it's the tenant's lifestyle that's creating the mold in the property. Well, actually, they're going to look at what's primary condensation, what's secondary condensation. Have you done absolutely everything that you need to do, including installing trickle vents in all of your windows, having working extractor fans in all of the bathrooms and the kitchens that vent outside, not just into the room? And have you evidence that those were working last time you were doing an inspection at the property? And it's going to all be about documentation and rigorous paperwork to make sure that you're complying with all of these things, because it comes back to exactly what Dave was saying. If you're going to stand in front of a judge, has what you've done been enough to make sure that no one has died from mold in that property? And it sounds extreme, but that is the reality of what happened to that poor boy up north, and that is why now these rules and regulations are coming in.
Compound that by, in Bristol, there are AI chatbots phoning your tenants, telling them that these are their rights.
Yeah, absolutely. On the amendment side, go over to you.
So proposed amendment from the peers. So it's just had its second reading on the 4th of February in the House of Lords. There are 50 pages of proposed amendments. So lots and lots. I'm going to give you just a few. There are loads of blog articles on this. As I say, we talk about this all the time. It's like until we are literally sick to the back teeth for hearing it, because we're going to try and keep you safe. On our website, lots of blog articles, and you'll be able to see them on there. But yeah, 50 pages of proposed amendments. It's important, again, to look at what's happening politically. 1 in 3 peers are landlords. So obviously it's gone into the House of Lords, and there's a huge bias there, which obviously is good for us.
But has actually created a little bit of common sense, because there are a lot of things that they're proposing where you think that is going to shake up the system in a negative way, and it's going to be impacting the very same tenants that you're trying to protect. And the student landlords one is one we'll talk about later on. So actually they have brought a little bit of common sense, but it still has to go back to the Commons as part of the amendments.
Yeah. So some of the amendments, or the proposed amendments I should say, you just look at them and you know for a fact they're not going to come in. So one of them is that they propose that small landlords, and by small landlords, they term them as no more than 5 properties, will still be allowed to use Section 21. I think we can all see political hot potato. Labour wants Section 21 gone. They were talking, thanks Sue, they were talking about immediately they came in, which has not proved to be possible because it's tied into the new tenancies that we've got coming in with the bill, but they want it gone like yesterday. So anything that's going to halt or impact the abolition of Section 21, I can't see happening. What I was really pleased to see, and I did spend several hours reading the transcript on Hansard, and honestly, they were there for hours and hours talking about it, you can imagine. But the amendments are cross-party, and I thought that was really interesting. So you've got all of the parties jumping up with, again, 1 in 3 of the peers are landlords themselves, but it's not just from the opposition that's talking about the fact that these proposed amendments need to come in. The committee stage, which is the next stage after the second reading, has been tabled for 2 days, 22nd and the 23rd of April. What's going to happen here is it will be taken apart line by line. Each proposed amendment will be discussed, and they will decide what ones they want to leave in and which ones they don't, to go to the House of Commons for their approval. So next up from there will be the report stage. So their report stage is usually about 14 days after the committee stage. and followed by a third reading just for a tidy up. At this stage, it's unusual that anything new comes in. This is usually them looking through and going, are we happy, guys? Can this go through? Can we recommend this to the House? And it's the last reading before it goes through to the House of Commons.
Yeah, I think coming back to as well the concept of the cross-party, the language is extremely important. The Labour manifesto, as part of their push to get voted into government, was we will end the unscrupulous and unfair behaviour of the no-fault evictions. It's changed from the renters' reform to the renters' rights. You can see which way this is going. And one of the things they're also looking at doing is massively increasing the penalties that they can push forward, which again we can talk about shortly. So what happens next, guys? Will common sense prevail? What do you guys think? With government, will common sense prevail? No, I can see a lot of shaking heads there. No, I don't think it will. But the reality is we need to understand the new framework and the new environment that we're working in. Unless your strategy is like Richie's, where you never ever want to work with a tenant again, or at all, I would go as far as to say, then you need to understand these things so that then you know what you need to do. But I would also say to Richie, and he would agree, that renting the property is always going to be an exit for development if for whatever reason you can't sell those properties. So at least an awareness of this, or someone in your circle who you can work with who has an awareness of this, is really, really important as part of moving forwards. This one is going to be massive. They were looking, as part of the renters' reform, so this was the Tories' proposals beforehand, at having a 6-month moratorium of introducing these things slowly. Labour have gone, no, bang, day one, everything is coming in. All changes are going to happen. One of the things they're looking to bring in is the removal of fixed terms. So at the moment you can rent for 6 months fixed term or 12-month fixed term, or even sometimes longer if you want to. And again, for student landlords, that's extremely important because you'll rent September to September or July to July, however you like to structure that for your tenancies. But if you've got an immediately rolling contract for a group of tenants who are joint and severally liable, in theory, someone needs to drop out of university for personal reasons. They give you notice in October, that tenancy comes to an end in December, and you know you're not going to find another group of students in December who want to move in immediately because everyone else is looking for next year. It will create a bit of a secondary market for student properties, but the reality is student landlords will look at that and go, well, I can't keep that property empty until September, so what am I going to do? I've got a 2-month ticking clock to the end of that tenancy because we've had notice served on us. I might ask the group to try and find somebody new, but what if they can't? I might ask the groups, let's say it's a group of 5 and 4 are going to stay, will you guys pay that little bit extra and still cover that cost of 5? But what if they can't? And their tenancy is coming to an end, so you need to set up a new agreement at the end of that 2-month period with either 4, hopefully a 5th, or a completely new structure and setup. Now, for PBSA, that won't be the case. So there is going to be little niches that won't be bound by the same rules that we are as landlords having 5, 6-bed HMO properties. So knowing what you're going to do in that situation is important because forewarned is forearmed. Are you going to switch your model? Are you going to stay with students? Are you going to try and find extra one person to join that group? Are you going to help them? At what point in that 2-month process are you going to decide enough's enough? I need to actually go back and find, for example, a working professional to rent those rooms. And that's just one small example of what you're going to do if you're a student landlord renting when they removed for fixed-term contracts. The political landscape is going to change. It is changing. It's very much leaning towards tenants. I don't think this Labour government have fully thought through exactly what all of these impacts are going to have. I think from the transcript they've taken a lot of what the Lords have said on board, but a lot of these amendments won't get put through. You know, they're talking about restricting when you can use guarantors, when you're allowed to take guarantors. They were originally talking about only having guarantors lasting for 12 months and not the length of the full tenancy. So it's very, very much tenant leaning.
So it can go back and forth between the two houses, the House of Lords and the House of Commons, via parliamentary ping pong, they call it, which I think is an interesting phrase, for a year. And I think the political landscape is really important. I think looking at the language and understanding the political landscape is really important because they said they wanted it to be finished, completed by June. And that does not look like that's going to happen. Do they want it to go back and forth for a year? I don't think they do. I think they want speed and certainty. I think there are certain things they really would like to see and they would hold out for, like Section 21, as I've mentioned before. I think personally, from looking at what's happening and listening to the language used, there could be some pragmatism that would prevail as opposed to common sense. Because I think if you're looking at government and looking for common sense, then you're looking in the wrong place. But pragmatism, could that prevail? Well, yes. But I think there are certain things that they won't roll over on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Things are definitely going to change. If you look at some, I think on the next slide mention the proposed amendments. No, sorry. If you look at some of the proposed amendments, as I say, we've got a blog on it on our website. They're looking at when you can and can't use guarantors. They're looking at some really common sense stuff. So the bill says you can't discriminate against pets. But what the Lords have said, well, hang on a minute, there isn't a product on the market that protects the landlord and gives them comfort and safety. So what they've said is, let's go to the market and say, bring something in that's fit for purpose before we start saying you can't legislate against pets. You know, and they're looking at how do we make it happen. Another proposed amendment is, let's look at the judiciary. We know that it's a system that's creaking at the seams. Let's look about getting rid of Section 21, but let's only do it when we can, because Section 21, no fault, is a mandatory. You can go through as long as you've got your paperwork right, whereas everything else is a discretionary. And what they're saying is there isn't room for absolutely every eviction that's served to go through under discretionary. Let's have a look at it. So a lot of the stuff is really, really common sense. But will it go through or won't it? I mean, it's anyone's guess, but I think changes are definitely coming upon us. And it's definitely a time for clinical record taking, for knowing why you've done something, for documenting it, and thinking to yourself, taking a step back and thinking, if I was in front of a judge because something horrible had happened, how would I explain my actions? Really, really important.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the pets, again, is another really interesting one. So again, who at the moment will allow their tenants to have pets? Can I have a show of hands? 1, 2, so okay, 5 or 6. The rule will be that you won't be able to reasonably withhold a request for having pets. Can they have 3 dogs in an HMO room? No, that's not going to be reasonable. But if you've got a family rental that's a house with a garden, you are not going to be able to refuse them to have pets. And what they're saying is the reason landlords don't is because of damage. So we will go back and we will change the tenant fee ban 2019 to allow landlords to ask for protection, for insurance, as Angie was mentioning, for pets that are in that property. But there are no products like that on the market right now, and who's going to enforce that those premiums are actually being paid? Yeah. So year on year on year, you might have a policy that lasts 12 months when the tenant first moves in. Now you have to make sure that you're checking that that policy is in place every 12 months. And if it isn't, you could say that's a breach of contract, I'm going to evict you under Section 8, and then take 12, 15 months to go through the system, and in which time they've got the insurance back in place and your case is now null and void. And it's just going to create a lot more extra work that you need to be on top of. And Pets in Let is coming, that's not going away. I think the key point here, I'm just going to reiterate, things are going to change, but change isn't necessarily a bad thing if you're educated and you're aware of what's coming. And that's why the Partners in Property community is as fantastic as it is, because everyone here is looking to be on the front foot and be aware of all of those things that are changing. Guys, we do weekly updates. I'll leave that up on the board. If it's something that you're interested in, Angie and I write blog articles on things like this all the time. Of course, being Southwest and Bristol focused, there's some Bristol pieces, but it's Renters' Rights Bill, compliance changes, and giving out good quality information that comes direct from source with quotes from the government website, so we all know actually where we stand, and don't listen to your mate John down the pub who reckons maybe tenants can have a cat or two. That's not how it works. We need to go directly to source and get this information properly. Also, go on.
No, I was going to say what we've also been doing is, because there's an awful lot of content in the Renters' Rights Bill, but all everyone can see is Section 21, we've been taking them piece by piece and doing a focus. So this week, for instance, is the Landlord's Register. So there's all sorts of things that the bill is talking about, and we've taken piece by piece and done a focus.
Yeah, absolutely. So guys,
that's us.
Yeah, that's us. Hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that kind of gave you guys a few little things to think about, some awareness of something that you might not have been aware of in terms of Renters' Rights Bill, and it is important to stay on that front foot. And we will keep banging on about it. You will be sick of hearing us talk about the Renters' Rights Bill, but you will be informed and you won't be caught off guard by the changes, which is extremely important.